Well, thank you very much, Stella. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose land we are meeting here, and I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and to their elders, both past and present, and acknowledge any elders who are with us here today. To Stella and all the board members of VCOS, to Emma King, the CEO of VCOS, to my parliamentary colleagues, to David and Samantha, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for having us here today. We're in the midst of an election, but I didn't know the big election on today was actually going to be the VCOS board election. So good luck to all the candidates. Look, it's a real pleasure to be here today for your annual general meeting, and in the brief time that I have available to me, I do want to touch upon some matters that relate to my portfolio, but it is a challenge with these types of discussions to try and do justice to just how much we have been doing over the last 4 years. I think you're well aware that our government has been characterised by the pace of reform and the unprecedented levels of investment, and nowhere is this more obvious than in the social services sector. You know, we came to office in November 2014. We inherited a mess, and we had recommissioning, we had cuts in services. I remember all the discussions I had in opposition with so many of you in this room here today that were feeling the brunt of really a lack of vision in the social services space. So we came to government absolutely committed to changing that, and we didn't want to waste a minute, and we have seen so many socially progressive reforms during our time. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for the role that you have played, both in advocacy but also in working with us in a very collaborative fashion in delivering those important reforms, because you have been at the forefront of the social policy reforms that I believe are actually leading our nation. Some of the outcomes that we've delivered across my portfolio, and we've delivered these together, include closing the gap between the participation of Aboriginal children and non-Aboriginal children in our kindergartens, a child protection allocation rate that's now reached 88%, a child protection workforce that's now 50% bigger than when we came to office, thanks to 4 years of investment in 610 positions. None of this could have happened without you working with us to deliver it, and you know more than many that there is so much more still to do, and our Labor team is incredibly keen to be given the opportunity to keep delivering these social policy reforms with you. These outcomes have been underpinned by a desire to do more earlier for our families and children who want to intervene early and prevent crisis rather than pick up the pieces after they've happened. And I've had the great honour to be the Minister for Early Childhood Education. We've certainly sought to use our universal services in that portfolio alongside the reforms we've made to child protection and out-of-home care to make that a key point of our approach and our reforms. I do think Victoria is already leading the nation in the early years space, but I certainly want us to be absolutely known for that, and in fact be very competitive internationally as well. We've made a lot of strides in doubling early childhood education investment compared to the previous coalition government. Last year I released our early childhood reform plan, and we've done things like introduce needs-based funding into our kindergartens, and we're the first state in Australia to do this, and a reform that I'm particularly proud of, and we're starting to roll that out from next year. We found through Australian research that 1 in 5 kids in prep are starting school not ready for school, and these are the kids that tend to stay behind throughout their schooling. So we want to fundamentally shift the outcomes there, make sure kids get the best start to their education. So this $58 million plan ensures that we can invest in our littlest Victorians at that critical point in their personal and social development, paying for things like speech therapists and allied health professionals, literacy and numeracy experts and others to come in and work intensively with children at that kindergarten age. We've delivered more than 175% increase to our maternal and child health system, which is the envy of other jurisdictions, and this is particularly important when it comes to supporting vulnerable families. We've introduced, again, an Australian first, additional visits for women experiencing or at risk of experiencing family violence, making sure that we can provide that early support. And of course, you'd be well aware, and Mikakos has certainly been an advocate for this, that we have committed to being the first state in the nation to introduce 2 years of preschool education. This will be a revolutionary reform as we embark upon a nearly $5 billion plan over the next decade to roll out 3-year-old kindergarten to every Victorian child, offering every child 5 hours at least by 2020, and then scaling it up to full 15 hours over the next decade. A massive investment in both our facilities, as we've committed to nearly 1,000 new and upgraded kindergartens, but also investing in our workforce, and we'll have more to say about that as well. One key example of our collaboration between our government and the sector has been in the Roadmap for Reform, which is about shifting the focus from a crisis response to a focus on early intervention and prevention, and I particularly want to acknowledge Emma King for her leadership as part of the Roadmap Implementation Ministerial Advisory Group. As part of this reform agenda, we've delivered a number of Australian firsts, including professionalised foster care, a new kinship care model, investments in a number of evidence-based programs, particularly programs that work very intensively with families to make sure we can actually keep families intact or reunify children with their families as much as is possible. We've looked at how we can do more to support young people making the difficult transition from care to independent adulthood. And again, we've worked and listened to both young people leaving care, but also many of you in this room who have championed the need for support for young people leaving care. So in September this year, I announced $11.6 million over 5 years to roll out home stretch, starting from the first half of 2019. Now, this isn't an election commitment, it's actually money that we have committed here and now to make sure we can start to roll out this reform and give young people the option of remaining with their carer until they turn 21. And this will offer young people a number of supports, not just the allowance to their carer, but also case management support that these young people need. In other Australian firsts, and it was mentioned earlier, our absolute commitment as a government to self-determination. We have implemented the Aboriginal Children Aboriginal Care Initiative, which is enabling our Aboriginal agencies to take full legal responsibility for Aboriginal children on protection orders. It was something that sat in the statute books for many, many years and never actually had been put into practice. So we have actually enabled now 2 organisations to begin this process, and have actually provided funding to enable others to do so as well. And as part of the Transitioning Aboriginal Children Initiative, we are on track to achieve the target of 50% of Aboriginal children in care on contractable orders being case managed by Aboriginal community-controlled organisations by the end of this year. We're the only state to be able to reach, to be able to say that we will have half of Aboriginal children case managed and supported by Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. Now, one of the main drivers of child protection, as you well know, is of course family violence, and the Labor Party is the only party that will implement all 227 Royal Commission recommendations. There's much that we need to do, but we have invested at an unprecedented $2.6 billion to deliver these reforms to keep women and children safe. And we know that this kind of wholesale reform means that you can't just focus on one part of the equation. You just can't look at the policing part of this only in isolation. You need to look at the supports that women and children need. You need to look at the prevention side of things. We need to shift society's attitudes, and that means also having a commitment to gender equality. Very briefly, in the time that I have available to me, I've been proud that we have doubled our investment in the youth affairs policy area as well. We've delivered new core programs. We have delivered a new policy that's actually about giving young people a seat at the table, having them actively involved in determining and working with us about what the needs of young people are. We've delivered new programs that focus again on early intervention and prevention, giving communities are getting a lot of attention in the media at the moment. Youth workers for the very first time, giving them access to a lot of early interventions and support to make sure that they are engaged with social services. And lastly, in the youth justice space, a wholesale reform, unprecedented $1.2 billion investment, more than double that in the previous government. The first independent review of the youth justice system in 17 years, and we are working through those recommendations as well. So there's a lot, as you can see, that we've delivered together over the past 4 years to improve the outcomes for vulnerable children and young people and their families. And of course, as we all strive to provide a good life for children and their families in this state, there's so much more that we all know that we need to keep on doing, and we know that we need to work with you to keep delivering on those reforms. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been an absolute privilege and honour for me to have been the Minister over the last 4 years, really working in a very important social services policy reform agenda, and I very much am looking forward to continuing to have that opportunity into the future. Thank you.